All right, so if you've been living under a rock, you should probably have already heard by now that the LCS and CBLOL slash LLA are going to be merging together for 2025. And this is huge. So if you don't know, the small details is essentially there's going to be 6 teams in the North Conference, they're calling it, or the LCS, and then there's going to be 6 teams in the Southern Conference, or CBLOL, essentially. And within that total of 6 teams in each conference, 1 team from the LLA will move to the LCS, and 1 team from the LLA will also move to CBLOL. Also, as part of the 6-team spots per conference, 1 slot will be reserved for a Tier 2 team to promote into. Or, say perhaps if those LLA teams or CBLOL teams that didn't make it into those, 6 spots, they'll be able to try and promote into their, separate league or whatnot. So, now what everyone is kind of confused about is, okay, which team in LCS, or 2 teams in LCS, are going to try and sell their franchise spot, right? And people are kind of assuming they're just kind of throwing away shots. Is it going to be Shopify? Is it going to be Immortals or Dignitas or, 100 Thieves, whatever? Well, let me actually show you something real quick. So here is a report from Jacob Wolf that happened in 2023 at the very end of it. So down here, I'm going to point you to evidence of why I think it's Immortals or Dignitas or 100 Thieves. So in Jacob Wolf's report, and this was when Evil Geniuses and Golden Guardians got their exit, is that it says, meanwhile, 100 Thieves listened to Riot's pitch and took some time to consider it. Right? So they were ones that kind of hesitated and then got back to Riot within 24 hours. Additionally, Immortals and Dignitas thoroughly considered Riot's offer, sources said. So, and both organizations have heard out open market offers from other interested organizations over the past few years. So, this is me telling you that I think it's Immortals, Dignitas, or 100 Thieves with that evidence. No one else has pointed this back out. It's just everyone has memories of fucking Goldfish in esports. So me, being the studious person of League of Legends esports, there you go. There's my fucking evidence. So it's one of those 3 teams. I'm pretty fucking sure. So Shopify also made out a tweet from, I believe it was their CEO, saying, we are committed to staying in the LCS for 2025. So you can also count Shopify out. And obviously fucking Cloud9 and Team Liquid and all that shit. Obviously they're going to stay, right? Like there would be no reason why those brands would leave. So there's a justification, and more so, I would actually lean towards Dignitas or 100 Thieves, because if you think about it, Immortals, first of all, they have most of their contracts are going through 2025, actually. And what's kind of strange too, I guess, is, or what we should all consider with Immortals is the fact that they have the MIBR brand, which is a Brazilian brand. So they have a clear way to maybe switch their branding over into, MIBR, and then maybe wiggle their way through, either they could try and apply for CBLOL position or something, or maybe they could just be the Latin American team that exists in the LCS, and then kind of take that audience, from the rest of Latin America, right? So I think that would be the smartest play for them, which is why I don't think that they're actually going to leave the LCS. Maybe they'll try for one last hurrah and say, okay, we're going to be, the Latin American team that exists in the LCS. Of course, there's going to be one additional slot, obviously, for the LLA team that comes in. But I'm just saying, like, they're going to be the additional, quote unquote, unofficial team, that exists in the LCS. So I think that would be the smartest play for them. And that's what I would do if I were them. So I actually think it's coming down to Dignitas or 100 Thieves. Also, in that Jacob Wolf article, they said that Complexity and FaZe also wanted to join the LCS. So what we might be able to see is, even if both of these teams wanted to exit, say, 100 Thieves and Dignitas, and then maybe Immortals also wanted to kind of stay, but they weren't sure. Maybe there could be a takeover of Complexity or FaZe Clan to get an additional spot, or maybe even Complexity or FaZe try and get a partnership with an LLA team, and then they come over and they kind of rebrand as, FaZe Clan or whatever. Because additionally, also you have to consider that all the teams in LCS and presumably in CBLOL as well, have an exit option. Because when this happened, when Golden Guardians and Evil Geniuses exited the league, Riot had to go to all the teams and say, do you want to leave the team? Because this was written in their contracts, in their franchise contracts. It says, if we give one team the option to leave the LCS, we have to give all teams the option to leave the LCS. So technically, even though we do need to get rid of 2 teams currently as it stands, right, because there's 8 teams, that means that technically all the teams could potentially leave, and we could see a reshuffling of different organizations even coming into the LCS, as it were, anyways, right? So maybe 100 Thieves and Dignitas and Immortals all say, fuck it, we're all leaving. And then maybe, FaZe Clan or Complexity tries to bid out for that last remaining spot, right? Like, that could be an option. So it's not set in stone exactly which teams are going to be staying. Just because the teams currently that are in there, it doesn't mean 2 teams are exiting out and then it's just going to lock at, the 6 different teams. So that's one huge thing to consider that no one else is pointing out. So one really cool thing that I like about this, overall, my opinion of this is that I think it's a good idea to save the LCS and also to big up the competition of the CBLOL, because it's not a competitive region. Like, people like to think that it is, but it's not. So one good thing from all of this is that the academy, essentially the tier 2 system, has a way to promote. So if you don't know, 5 teams are going to be the regular franchise teams, and then there's going to be 1 slot for a tier 2 promotion that will be a rotating door that you can constantly get promoted into. It's probably going to be for at least a year, obviously, minimum, or if not 2 years. So they already had done a test run over in the VCT, Valorant, of course, and they have the same system to where 1 slot is a rotating slot that allows tier 2 to promote into the league. And this was something that we had all discussed previously when obviously Evil Geniuses and Golden Guardians were exiting the league. We were like, well, why don't we just move to a Valorant, style system? Obviously, that didn't happen for a lot of different reasons. Mainly, I had pointed out that, okay, well, you also have to share the revenue with that entire team. So now I think with just only 1 team promoting and having a total of 6 teams, it's actually going to make the revenue pool of the entire franchise system work. And if you don't know, like, it's kind of a similar thing that happens in soccer, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but it's the fact that when a team promotes into, say, the Premier League or whatever the fuck they call it, they get part of that revenue pool. But the interesting thing is they have something called it's like a parachute fee, so that if you get knocked down, you still get access to like half of that revenue pool of the tier 1 team, so that you can try and promote back into. So we'll see if there's like some kind of parachute franchise fee that, you know, allows you to glide back down into tier 2 and hopefully make it back into tier 1 again. Who knows? That's to be foretold, obviously. But I think the really cool thing about this, not only just of the inherent nature of an academy team can promote, but it's that if you've been blackballed from the esports industry and say you're a toxic player or whatnot, you can actually promote into the LCS and say, okay, like, the fuck you got to say now? You know, like, I'm coming in here with my own ragtag team and you guys can't stop me now. Right. And so that I can prove that I'm, you know, one of the best players in this entire region. So I think that's actually one of the cool things about this. And maybe we'll actually get to see like some villain type shit, you know, of some players that were considered super toxic coming into the LCS and talking that shit or whatever. It's going to be like an additional cool storyline that I don't think anyone else is considering. So that's going to be a huge relief for those players. And I think that'll just add a different element and different angle to that I don't think anyone else is considering. So as far as the CBLOL and LLA, merger that's going to happen is obviously, if you've seen any of the kerfuffle on Twitter or on Reddit, all of the Brazilian fans are saying this is fucking bullshit. What we're doing is we're saving the LCS essentially. So we're sacrificing our league and we're saying, okay, we're going to fucking get rid of some spots and we're going to share our viewership with you. Fuck you, all you Americans, right? Kind of fair. So currently this split, there's 10 CBLOL teams and there's 6 LLA teams. I think one of the teams in LLA is actually disbanding, right? So I think technically there's 7 or something, but now there's 6. So this will remove 5 CBLOL teams and 4 LLA teams. Because, I mean, let's fucking be honest, like the additional, extra slot that's going to be for the guest slot, that's probably going to go to a CBLOL team. And then obviously they are forcing one LLA team in the Southern Conference. So we all know that CBLOL is the stronger region. So they're probably going to get 5 slots instead of, 4, right? So that's going to happen, right? There's going to be a reduction in CBLOL teams, essentially. No one gives a fuck about LLA. No one's even fighting for them, right? But it does suck that they're getting less teams. But all the Brazilian fans are forgetting, you essentially get a guaranteed spot at Worlds. You get a guaranteed spot into the group stage. Like, why is no one talking about that? That's just completely fucking being glossed over. Yes, you sacrificed, call it 5 CBLOL teams for 1 world spot. Yeah, I realize that, but it is still kind of cool that you now get representation on the world stage that normally you wouldn't get, because guess what? The LCS or the LEC would smash you in play-ins. Like, let's just fucking be real. Let's call a spade a spade. So you get a guaranteed spot. I think that's fucking sick. And we get to see, CBLOL try and compete with, another, call it emerging region, which is obviously the PCS and, Vietnam, of course. So that's going to be really cool to see. And I think that's something really underrated that people are just glossing over. And additionally, it's going to remove all the bottom feeder teams. We all know that the CBLOL is filled with fucking bottom feeder teams. And previously, of course, the LCS was filled with bottom feeder teams. And if you thought that, okay, well, realistically, there's maybe 8 competitive teams in LCS. Realistically, there's now there's 7, I would say, right? We technically have a league full of 8 teams, but I think 7 are really only competitive, right? Immortals was not competitive this last split, obviously. So even the LCS has difficulty fielding, call it 7 teams, right? Or 8 teams. We don't have that many players to be that competitive. So the same has to be true for CBLOL as well. Now, if your point is, I don't care, I just want to have a full league full of teams and full of amateur players that are Brazilian that I can watch, fair play. But, if you want to stay in the purgatory of being a shitty region, then it would probably be better if you consolidate and, get all these super teams everywhere. Because that's another thing that this consolidation is going to do, is it's essentially going to create super teams, everywhere. And, especially consider the LCS or whatnot. Just think of how many better teams there would be if there was only 6 teams in the league right now. We would have some really crazy teams, on the rosters now. And I think additionally, I think this is one of the reasons why Dignitas went ham this split, was because they had heard about this news, because obviously they have to tell the team owners and everything, hey, this is coming down the pipeline. We're going to give you notice for at least the summer split, right? So that you can make adjustments to your rosters as you see fit, make adjustments to your contracts as you see fit, because this is obviously coming down the pipeline. So Dignitas obviously could create this super team and either do one last hurrah, which may be what it looks like, before they exit out the league and take that exit package. Or, this is some way to boost their brand and boost their image for the new 2025 season, right? But regardless, this is going to allow super teams to essentially exist. Now, if you know anything about, my content and shit, before, I've dissed super teams before with Team Liquid super team. I thought it was kind of shit and kind of a bad idea because super teams often don't work, as we see. And one of the only few exceptions is G2, but they were a very unique team. Think of along the lines of Moscow 5 back in the day. But additionally, I think this entire thing is good as far as the consolidation of going down to 6 teams, with a North and South conference, is because this allows teams to earn a bigger chunk of what Riot are calling their global revenue pool, which I think is actually really great, because as we heard before, teams were hurting, obviously, esports winter and whatnot. And yes, of course, the teams, it's partially their fault. Yeah, I know all the salaries and shit were jacked up, paying Huni fucking $5 million or whatever, Impact $3 million, Jensen $2 million. Yeah, I know all the stories and shit, but this is at least going to help it be more sustainable, right? And to actually make it to where, all right, you guys fucked up, we're bailing out the banks, right? You guys remember any of that shit if you're old enough. So I think this also alludes to the fact that maybe we could get team skins coming soon, because Riot previously said that it was impossible to hand out team skins because there were just too many fucking teams. But if we reduce the number of teams and then we consolidate to make it 5 major regions, right? That means that no one feels left out if they aren't, well, except, Russia. But if no one feels left out, we can give a skin to, call it, each of the 5 major regions. Whoever, wins or whatever in the summer split or whatnot, maybe we could give a skin line to that winning team, and then the purchases for that skin line, say, call it 25% go to the global revenue pool of, that region, and then the other 25% goes to the actual team itself, and then the 50%, goes to Riot. right? So like maybe that could be a thing. Maybe we could actually get team skins. I think that's an exciting thing because previously, if you remember the post, I think it was in 2023, Lolesports, like John Needham had made a address about, you know, the current state of esports and whatnot. And they were talking about different revenue streams that they could possibly generate. And one of them was talking about team skins and whatnot. So I think this could be a realistic avenue that we go down. So that will be really cool if possibly we get that in the future. So one thing that many people are not considering right now is it's not clear that, call it the, you know, different CBLOL teams or LLA teams trying to compete for, you know, this academy spot would all fight to get the single guest spot in the Southern Conference. That's one thing that I'm really confused about, and I hope that Riot actually clarifies that. Like, can they go over into the Northern Conference and try and compete for the guest slot over there? Is that like an interchangeable place to where maybe both of the academy systems merge as well too, so that you can actually try and compete, you know, for those two additional spots? Because maybe the CBLOL tier 2 system is better than, say, the LCS tier 2 system. So maybe there could be, you know, two CBLOL teams in both of the leagues, you know, that happen, you know, over in the North Conference and the South Conference for the guest slots. That would be like a different ruffle inside, you know, this whole algorithm that we're calling it, right? Additionally, I wonder if the import rule may be changed, because currently the CBLOL and LLA are considered emerging regions. If you go look at the rule set, I actually checked today, they still count towards the maximum of 2 slots for your import slots, right? Your IMP slots or IMP slots, inter-regional movement policy slots. Now, they might not even be considered imports, right? Because just remember what happened with Oceania when we said essentially that's not a region anymore. We said, okay, we're going to let North America consider Oceania players as non-imports, right? And I think even technically LEC was able to get that. I'm not sure. But maybe that's going to be the case here, to where all of Americas, it's just not considered an import if you're from the Americas. So therefore, maybe we could see a funnel of the best players from CBLOL or LLA go over into the LCS. Now, there's the caveat, and I think this is something that the CBLOL fans are very fearful of, because they're just like, oh, it's fucking, you know, LCS importing all over again and just taking everybody's talent and stuff, and they're going to be taking our talent. Okay. Let's look at the names that we may consider to import. From the LLA, I looked at all the different rosters from Spring Split. Here's all the notable names that could possibly ever happen. Jose Dioto, who is a jungler who was previously in the LCS before. You had Ackerman, who's a famous support player, White Lotus, an ADC player, Solid Snake, who is a jungler, and Seiya, who is a mid laner. Those are the only 5 players we would probably ever import. Like, just good enough players. Those are the only 5 players that stick out to me to say maybe we would import them, right? But like, LLA doesn't fucking really have any players that we would ever import. Why would we import any of those players? We already tried Jose Dioto, which you can argue whether he's actually worthy of a spot still or now. I arguably would say no, he's not. I don't think he was necessarily good enough. But all those other players, I'm not even sure they're really worth importing into, right? CBLOL. And on top of that, also notice how none of those players, I didn't even say a top laner. So even if LLA were to make a super team, they couldn't even make a super team because they don't have a super top laner. I can't think of any top laner from that region that's actually a really good top laner that's like internationally well known, let's call it. Okay, then we go to CBLOL. You have Sales in support. He's a very well-known name. You have Robo Top, who is fucking gangster, right? And he may be worth importing. You have Red Burt, who has been a staple fucking name over in CBLOL as a support player. And you have Tinones, who is a mid laner, who has also been pretty well regarded as well. So you have four players, not a single jungler. Notice how CBLOL can't even form a super team themselves that, would be competition internationally, let's call it. So as far as like all these CBLOL fans saying, oh, you're going to steal all of our fucking players and shit like that. First of all, you only have four players that we would even consider fucking stealing to begin with. LLA, they're significantly worse, but, and they have 5 players that we would consider stealing possibly. You could argue Solid Snake, maybe not, or whatever. Jose Dioto obviously came over before, so he's a known element. So, no, I don't think realistically, even if we remove the import rules from the Americas, I don't actually think that suddenly there would just be a funnel up into the LCS. I don't think that's necessarily the case. So I just think that's a non-starter and a non-issue. So overall, I think the entire merger is good. We're going to be able to combine fan bases. The rivalry is going to be really fucking sick. We're going to have rivalries of like content creators. There's going to be like Spanish and Brazilian content creators that are like arguing and shit. We're going to have obviously the commentators and stuff that are going to be arguing for their, North Conference versus South Conference. We're going to have the fans that are talking shit to each other and everything. It's going to be really sick. And I think this is going to be like one of the bigger, call it new eras of the Western League of Legends. It's going to be really fucking cool. And especially considering that a lot of, Latin American players speak English, and, so it's going to be like very amicable and really fucking cool. And additionally, lest I remind you, CBLOL is going to be able to get a world spot guaranteed. So that's going to be sick as well. So the secondary news, a part of all of this, is obviously the APAC region, which is going to be comprised of the VCS, which is Vietnam, PCS, which is essentially what was the old LMS, LJL, which is the Japanese league, and LCO, which was Oceania. So they're all going to combine into one region. And I mean, sorry, but it just feels bad because it's going to be a lot of different fucking countries, and it's going to be a lot of different leagues that are just combining together. So as far as everyone else complaining, the LCS and whatnot complaining that, like, we're going to get fucked because we get one less world slot, and then CBLOL's like, well, we're getting reduced teams or whatnot. Dude, APAC, they're legitimately fucked. And I feel really bad for Vietnam because they're getting lumped into this entire thing. But I mean, they just got destroyed by that cheating scandal. So they probably don't have enough teams or enough players to even make a full league anymore. So they have to reduce teams, I would imagine. But also, to say that, Vietnam is like this small region or whatever, let me also point to you to another thing that I just remember from my memory is 2018. Here are the stats for, call it, server populations based on ranked. As you can see, Vietnam is at 2.8 million in 2018. They're the third biggest server. And this is just ranked population, so it might be, slightly different, but we're giving a rough estimate here, right? And this is in 2018. This is the only data that I could find. And if you look back at even Riot had said in 2018 on the forums, when the forums actually existed, Vietnam is the second largest region, slightly larger than Korea and EU West, and 1.5 times North America. So to say that, Vietnam is like this small region or whatnot, or that CBLOL is like a super huge region and they're like the second biggest region after LPL, I don't think that's true. I think it's Vietnam still. So it really does suck that Vietnam is kind of getting the short end of this stick. I think they're getting completely fucked over. Maybe there's some amateur teams actually that could fill those additional slots because obviously their server population is fucking gigantic. And I've heard this through multiple different areas and stuff of just, reading online throughout the years. So this seems to still be the case. I don't know about, call it 6 years, because, obviously 2018, it's been quite a while. But yeah, so I think Vietnam obviously gets shafted in all of this, and it kind of sucks for them. Now, additionally, I do want to kind of roll it back because I do remember another additional point that no one seems to be considering, which is that with the reduction of the LCS, we're moving down to 6 teams. And obviously one of those teams is going to be designated for tier 2 to promote into. Realistically, that's still less spots for, call it, the academy system or players to promote into. So we're technically actually losing room for academy players to get into the main league. The only difference is that you can actually make it as your own org and make it into, call it, the LCS, right? So like that's the only difference. So technically there are less spots for you if you're a player, but if you make a, call it, ragtag organization, or you create, say, a super team or something like that in the academy system, then yeah, you can promote into. But so really, realistically, what this means is that there are just less paychecks to go around for shitty players. That's what it means. So there's not going to be these fucking bottom feeders that, are like toggling in between academy and LCS or whatnot. It's just going to be, no, are you fucking good enough, or are you not? And therefore you will get promoted into the LCS. There's not going to be this fucking, nebulous purgatory to where like the 8th best team in the LCS is always the bottom feeders, and they're always like trying to get different academy players that kind of suck and kind of can't make it into, the regular league. So those players are just going to completely fall off, and it's going to be feast or famine essentially. And I'm all for it. Like fuck that. I don't think we even had enough paychecks to go around as far as, competitive players as far as that's concerned. So overall, I think the changes is good. It's going to make the leagues more competitive. It's going to be more an entertaining product. It's going to create a kind of nationalistic identities, which, are healthy within the sense of sports, call it. We're going to get different rivalries and shit like that. We're going to have like some cool rival, look at what's going on in the LEC as far as like Carmine Corp or Mad Lions Koi, right? Like they have the French or the Spanish audience and whatnot. And, the rest of the LC or LEC didn't really have a nationalistic type of part to them before those teams were even existed in the LEC. Now we're inherently going to have that in the LCS. So just be prepared for some trash talk between Brazilians and Americans and shit like that. Kind of like what happens over in, call it Counter-Strike before, or, now VCT, I would imagine. Also as well too, there's another thing to consider, which is co-streaming. Co-streaming is going to help so much. And I think this is cynically part of the reason why this entire thing is even happening. If you just look at the co-streaming numbers of, call it VCT, co-streaming numbers are fucking crazy. Like they're more crazy than what's happening in the LCS, call it, right? Or even just League of Legends in general, call it. Because dude, Tarek is hard carrying VCT. His stream numbers are like 3 times more than the official VCT broadcast. You don't really see that in League of Legends, when we're doing like an international tournament like MSI or Worlds. Kadril is not 3 times more than the official English broadcast. He's not even 1-to-1, right? He's like maybe half or maybe a third of the actual English broadcast, right? Like that's obviously our biggest streamer. But, and you compare that to Tarek. Tarek's boosting really fucking huge numbers. Additionally, you have Mixwell. Mixwell's another huge streamer over in VCT that's doing very well too. So we're going to get like all these different call it Brazilian streamers that will able to be streamed, and that'll boost everybody's numbers up, and we'll have like a mix of fans. Because also, one thing that a lot of people don't consider is cross-pollination between different co-streamers and whatnot, and different actual mainstreams in different languages. Because this is just like the whole thing of why streamers themselves, they do collaborations, because a collaboration itself, the reason why they work and the reason why they're important in like the Twitch economy is because if you have call it half fan, I would like to call it a half fan versus a full fan, right? Like let's take someone like I Will Dominate and Cadril, for instance. If they do a co-stream together, they do a collaborative stream together, they have each of their, call it half fans, like say they watch Dom stream, but they somehow don't know Cadril stream, and they do a collaboration, and they're a half fan of I Will Dominate, and they watch his stream, somewhat, then maybe if they get introduced to Cadril, suddenly they become a full fan of Cadril because they actually like Cadril's style better. And maybe there's a half fan of Cadril that traditionally just kind of watches Cadril sometimes, and then he gets introduced to I Will Dominate and he likes his style more. He says, I want to become a full fan of I Will Dominate. And, he's able to actually pitch in and give revenue to I Will Dominate that he normally wouldn't give to Cadril. And same for vice versa. There's the fan from I Will Dominate that suddenly likes Cadril and will give full revenue to Cadril, right? But he wasn't at that step with I Will Dominate. That's what cross-pollination does, and it's better for all people within that cross-pollination. This is what happens with official streams. You have cross-pollination of Brazilian fans and call it American fans, right? Is that maybe, for instance, they start to like the American co-streamers or whatnot, or the American broadcast, and so they become full fans of that American part of the ecosystem rather than being a half fan of the Brazilian ecosystem. So it's just better for everyone else, and that's something that I don't think the average fan understands because they just don't know streaming economics or anything like that, or just content creator economics. So that's just one really underrated aspect that none of these fans are considering, and I don't blame them because they just don't know the economics itself. So that's one huge thing. So anyways, I'm very excited for all of this. I think it's going to be really cool. I think there's a lot of different underrated aspects that people are just not talking about. And essentially, this is going to be very healthy for both regions. And I'm just really excited for it. I think it's going to be really great, and it's going to be really competitive.